My name is Hannah Nelson, and I am 33 years old. 3 days after I had a surgery and delivered my twin boys, I stood on my own front porch in the freezing Wisconsin winter while my mother told me I could not come inside. Not asked, told. My brother's family needed the house, she said through a crack in the door, and I could find a rental because I was the strong one and my brother needed a break. She said it the way you would cancel a newspaper subscription. There was one detail my family had managed to forget in all their planning. One line of print on a property deed filed at the county office. What my brother did to my furnace a few weeks later still makes my stomach turn. And what I finally did with a $40 trail camera made my mother beg me to drop the felony charges. Welcome back to QT Told Stories, where the women who spent their lives fixing everyone else's emergencies finally learned to stop picking up the tab. If stories about drawing lines in the concrete and letting the consequences fall where they may speak to you, tell me your age in the comments and subscribe. This one begins at 2 a.m. on a porch that belonged to me. Before that frozen night can mean anything, meet the woman who paid for the porch. So let me back up. The air was 10 degrees below zero. The cold up here does not just chill you, it bites exposed skin and freezes the moisture in your nostrils the second you step outside. I stood on the concrete porch of my own house, carrying the impossible weight of 2 infant car seats. Inside them, asleep in fleece, were my 3-day-old twins, Leo and Luke. My incision burned like a hot wire under my winter coat. I shifted my weight, balancing Leo's carrier against my hip, and pushed my house key into the front door lock. It slid in, but it did not turn. I tried again, nudging the brass with my frozen thumb. The cylinder was stiff. It was new metal. I looked closer under the porch light and saw the fresh, unweathered finish of a brand new deadbolt. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass of the side light window. The lock clicked from the inside, and the door opened, but only 4 inches. The security chain pulled taut. My mother, Diane, looked out at me through the narrow gap. She wore her thick flannel robe, her hair neatly pinned. She had moved into my guest room 2 months earlier, under the guise of helping me through the end of a high-risk pregnancy. "Mom," I said, "my teeth's starting to chatter. The door is chained, and my key is not working." She did not unlatch the chain. She looked down at the 2 car seats resting on the freezing concrete, then back up to my face. Her expression held the serene, unbothered detachment of a receptionist delivering an office policy. "You and the twins need to leave, Hannah," she said softly. "Tyler and Lauren are moving in tomorrow. They lost their lease, and with the baby coming, your brother's family needs this space more. You are strong. You will figure out a rental." The wind whipped across the porch, lifting the edge of Luke's blanket. For 33 years, I had been the family's shock absorber. As a medical billing specialist, my days were spent auditing thousands of claim codes, finding the errors, and making the math balance. My family treated me the exact same way. Whenever Tyler's life went into the red, they expected me to absorb the deficit. I was supposed to cry now. I was supposed to beg or yell or agree to hand over the 3-bedroom house I bought on my own at 29 just to keep the peace. I did none of those things. In billing, when a fraudulent claim is submitted, you do not argue with the paper. You flag it. "It is 2 a.m, Mom," I said. "My sons are 3 days old." "Tyler needs a break," she replied, her voice firming up into the familiar tone of a mother protecting her only son. "I packed a bag of your clothes. It is by the garage. We will talk when you are thinking clearly." The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place. I stood in the biting cold, the silence of the neighborhood ringing in my ears. I did not knock again. I reached into the side pocket of my hospital bag, pulling out my phone and a thick, tabbed manila folder I never traveled without. I dialed the non-emergency dispatch for the county sheriff. I gave my name, my address, and stated that a relative was actively trespassing and had locked me and my newborn infants out in sub-zero weather. 10 minutes later, the snow crunched under the tires of 2 squad cars pulling into my driveway. The headlights swept across the front of the house, illuminating the frosted glass where my mother still stood watching. Even through the blur of the window, I saw her silhouette freeze and the confident posture drain right out of her shoulders. I carried the heavy infant seats down the icy brick steps. My surgical incisions stung with every movement. I secured Leo and Luke back into the warm cabin of my idling vehicle. The heater was still blasting, circulating hot air over the sleeping babies. I sat in the driver's seat and watched my own breath fog the cold windshield. The flashing blue and red lights of the sheriff cruisers bounced off the snowbanks. They painted the pristine white yard in rhythmic, bruising colors. I had a few minutes before the officers would run my license plates, verify my identity, and walk up to my front entrance. In my profession, an audit does not happen because of one minor mistake. An audit is triggered because a pattern of discrepancies forces you to look at the financial ledger as a whole. Sitting in the driver's seat, rubbing the feeling back into my numbed fingers, I initiated a mental audit of my own relatives. For years, I had ignored the warning signs. I chose to view their actions through a lens of familial obligation. That lens shattered the moment my key failed to turn the deadbolt. I purchased the colonial property on Marigold Drive 4 years ago, right before my 30th birthday. I did not have a partner or a trust fund to rely on. I had a quiet, rented office, a dual monitor setup, and a willingness to work 70-hour weeks. I audited complex medical codes for regional hospital networks. Every holiday, differential shift, every overtime weekend went directly into a down payment fund. When I signed the closing papers, my hands shook. The real estate was mine. It featured 3 bedrooms, a sprawling backyard bordered by pine trees, and a solid oak staircase. I painted the walls. I planted the garden. I earned every square foot. Tyler is 3 years younger than me. In our family economy, I was the reliable revenue stream, and he was the perpetual deficit. Our parents treated his life like a venture capital fund that simply needed one more round of investment to become profitable. Tyler never held a steady job for more than 8 months. He bounced from a failed landscaping business that left him with broken equipment, to a disastrous cryptocurrency mining phase, and then to a drop shipping company that filled the garage with boxes of unsold inventory. He was always one big idea away from success. Lauren, his wife, matched his unearned ambition perfectly. She possessed expensive tastes and harbored a vocal disdain for their cramped 2-bedroom apartment downtown. At every Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas morning, she would corner me by the appetizer tray to drop heavy hints about how nice it must be to have so much unused space. She often mentioned how selfish it felt for one single woman to hoard a whole residence while growing families struggled. I always smiled politely and offered her more cheese. I assumed her comments stemmed from simple jealousy. I did not realize her complaining was actually an appraisal. The hostile infiltration began 2 months ago. My obstetrician had flagged my pregnancy as high risk. Carrying twins brought complications including gestational diabetes and blood pressure spikes that earned me mandatory bed rest in my 3rd trimester. My mother called me the day after my doctor delivered the news. She offered to pack a bag and stay in my guest room. She claimed she wanted to help her daughter through a difficult time. She insisted a pregnant woman living alone needed her mother nearby. I believed her. That specific detail stings the most when I examine the timeline. I actually believed she was acting out of genuine maternal care. During those 2 months, I was confined to the living room couch, working from a laptop tray while my ankles swelled. Diane took over the household chores. She cooked the meals, she sorted the incoming mail, and she managed the grocery runs. But I noticed odd details that I brushed off due to sheer exhaustion. I caught her in the upstairs hallway holding a yellow tape measure. When I asked what she was doing, she claimed she was checking the floor dimensions to order a new rug. Another afternoon, I found Tyler in the backyard, examining the property line and pointing out the tool shed to Lauren. My mother stated they had just stopped by to drop off some soup. Sitting in the safety of my warm vehicle, the puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. I tallied the financial bailouts I had provided over the past decade. $4,000 to cover rent when Tyler was between ideas. $2,000 for a vehicle repair because Lauren burned out her transmission. Uncounted groceries paid utility bills, and cash slipped into birthday cards that were meant to keep the peace. I never asked for repayment. I viewed those transactions as the cost of admission to remain in good standing with my own parents. I thought paying their debts made me a good sister. It only made me a reliable target. This midnight lockout was not a sudden act of desperation because Tyler lost his apartment lease. You do not install a fresh brass deadbolt at 2 a.m. on a whim. Changing locks requires scheduling. The new hardware meant a locksmith had been hired days, perhaps weeks prior. My mother had weaponized my hospital stay. While I was in a sterile operating room enduring major surgery to bring my sons into the world, Diane was coordinating a theft of my real estate. She packed my clothes into bags. She altered my security. She intended to present me with a finished situation upon my return, assuming I would be too weak, too tired, and too hormonal to fight back. She thought I would surrender. I looked down at the thick manila folder resting on the passenger seat next to the diaper bag. Inside was my state driver's license, a stack of recent utility statements bearing my name, and the original certified property deed. I always keep my vital documents organized in a fireproof safe. I brought them in my hospital bag because I am the type of person who prepares for bureaucratic worst-case scenarios. I expected to argue with insurance adjusters over neonatal intensive care charges. I never expected to need my deed to prove I owned the driveway I was currently parked in. The freezing Wisconsin wind howling outside the car window seemed to match the temperature of my own blood. The anger I should have felt was entirely absent. Instead, a profound clinical detachment settled over my shoulders. The family ledger was finally balanced. The debt was zeroed out. My mother had spent her entire life expecting me to handle the hard things so Tyler would not have to experience discomfort. Tonight, she was going to learn exactly how efficiently I handled hard situations. The driver's side doors of the police cruisers clicked open. 2 uniformed officers stepped out into the freezing night. Their heavy boots crunched against the packed snow. They adjusted their duty belts and shined their bright flashlights toward the frosted glass of my front entrance. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I grabbed the manila folder. I left the engine running with the heat on high to protect Leo and Luke. I stepped back out into the sub-zero wind. My mother thought she held the ultimate authority behind her chained door, but as I walked up the snowy driveway to meet the officers, I knew something she did not. Authority does not care about your feelings or your entitlement. Authority cares about the paperwork, and I held all of it. The crunch of my boots on the frozen driveway sounded unnaturally loud. 2 deputies from the county sheriff department met me halfway up the walk. Their breath plumed in the frigid air, illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the snowbanks. The older deputy, a man with graying temples and a thick winter jacket, asked if I was the one who called dispatch. I nodded, keeping my hands visible and my voice steady. I explained that my mother had chained the front entrance from the inside, changed the primary deadbolt, and refused to let me bring my newborn infants into the residence. The younger officer glanced at my idling vehicle, noting the exhaust billowing into the night sky. He asked if the children were safe and warm. I confirmed they were. The older deputy gestured toward the porch, instructing me to stand behind them while they handled the initial contact. In Wisconsin, law enforcement deals with domestic disputes every single night, and they are trained to de-escalate situations before they spiral out of control. I knew they walked up those icy brick steps expecting a messy, emotional family argument. I intended to give them a very different kind of interaction. The older deputy knocked firmly on the fiberglass door. He announced his presence, his voice carrying over the whistling wind. Less than 10 seconds later, the interior lock clicked. The security chain was unlatched. Diane swung the door wide open. If I had not been standing there, shivering in the sub-zero temperature, I might have applauded her performance. My mother had transformed her demeanor instantly. Gone was the flat, unbothered dictator who had ordered me to find a rental property. In her place stood a deeply concerned, gentle grandmother. She clutched the collar of her flannel robe, her eyes widening in feigned alarm at the sight of the uniforms. "Oh my goodness, officers," Diane said, her voice dripping with artificial distress. "Please come inside out of the cold. Is everything all right?" The older deputy held his ground on the threshold. "Ma'am, we received a call regarding an illegal lockout at this address. The caller stated she resides here and is being denied entry." Diane let out a soft, sympathetic sigh. She looked past the officers, meeting my gaze with a sorrowful, pitying expression. She shook her head slowly. "I am so sorry you had to come out in this weather," she told them, adopting the hushed tone of someone discussing a tragic medical diagnosis. "That is my daughter, Hannah. She just delivered twins 3 days ago. It was a very difficult surgery. Her hormones are fluctuating terribly, and she is experiencing severe postpartum distress. We are just trying to get her to rest. She is confused, officers. This is just a family misunderstanding. I locked the door to keep her safe because she is not thinking clearly." It was a masterful tactic. In modern American society, maternal mental health is a sensitive, serious issue. Law enforcement professionals are trained to approach postpartum crises with extreme caution. The older deputy shifted his weight, his posture relaxing slightly. He turned his head, casting a doubtful glance in my direction. The narrative Diane painted was plausible. A sleep-deprived, recovering mother having a mental breakdown while her caring grandmother tried to manage the household. If I had reacted the way my relatives trained me to react, if I had started weeping, screaming, or defending my sanity, I would have proven her diagnosis right. The authorities would have chalked it up to a civil matter, suggested we separate for the evening, and left me out in the cold. But I audit claims for a living. When a hospital submits a bill for a complex surgical procedure, they must provide the corresponding diagnostic codes to justify the expense. If the documentation does not support the narrative, the claim is rejected. Diane had just submitted a fraudulent claim to the police. I possessed the documentation to reject it. I stepped around the younger deputy, ignoring my mother entirely. I unclasped the manila folder I carried and retrieved 3 specific items. I handed them directly to the older officer. "I am not confused, and I am not experiencing a mental health crisis," I stated in a flat, clinical tone. "The woman standing in that foyer is Diane Nelson. She is my mother, and she is a guest. I am the sole legal owner of this real property." The older deputy clicked on a tactical flashlight. The bright LED beam illuminated the papers in his gloved hands. On top was my state-issued driver license bearing my photograph and the exact address of the colonial house we were standing in front of. Beneath that was the most recent water and sewer utility statement, also printed with my name and matching the location. The final document was the undeniable trump card. It was a certified copy of the warranty deed, bearing the raised, embossed seal of the county recorder. There was only one grantee listed on that heavy stock paper: Hannah Nelson. The older deputy read the documents carefully. He checked the seal. He looked at my license, verifying the birth date and the facial features, then handed the stack back to me. The atmosphere on the porch shifted instantaneously. The professional leniency he had extended to Diane vanished. He turned back to the doorway. The flashlight beam swept across Diane's face, catching the sudden twitch in her jaw. "Ma'am," the deputy asked, his voice hardening into the sharp cadence of a law enforcement professional establishing facts, "do you own this property?" Diane gripped the edge of the doorframe. "Well, it is a family home. I am her mother. I moved in 2 months ago to help with the babies. We have an arrangement." "Do you pay rent?" the deputy pressed. "Do you have a signed lease agreement?" "No, but that is not the point," Diane stammered, the sweet grandmother facade beginning to fracture. "Her brother Tyler is moving his wife in tomorrow morning. They need the space more than she does. She is single. She can rent an apartment. We agreed as a unit that this is the best arrangement for everyone." I did not agree to anything. I interjected calmly. "She changed the front deadbolt while I was in the maternity ward. She is attempting to establish residency for my brother without my consent." The younger officer stepped up beside his partner, placing a hand near his duty belt. Ma'am, do you receive your official mail at this address? Do you have your name on any utility bills associated with this structure? Diane blinked her eyes, darting between the two uniforms. No, my mail goes to my post office box. But you do not understand. Tyler has been struggling. He needs a break. The older deputy held up a gloved hand, cutting off her excuses. I understand perfectly, ma'am. In the state of Wisconsin, establishing tenancy requires a formal lease payment of rent or receiving official mail at the location for an extended period. You meet none of those criteria. Your son meets none of those criteria. You are a guest in this woman's home, and right now, the legal owner is revoking your invitation. Diane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The smug, unbothered confidence she had worn behind the chained door dissolved into pale panic. The reality of the legal system was crashing down on her emotional manipulation. She had built her entire plan on the assumption that familial guilt would overrule the law. She never anticipated facing an opponent who treated the situation as a dry administrative dispute. The homeowner wants to enter her property. The older deputy continued his tone, leaving zero room for negotiation. You are going to step back, unblock this entrance, and allow her inside. If you refuse, or if you attempt to bar her access again, you will be placed under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct. You will leave this property in handcuffs in the back of my cruiser. Do we have an understanding? My mother stared at the deputy as if he were speaking a foreign language. Her dominion over the household had never been challenged by an outside authority. She looked at me, searching for a trace of the compliant daughter she had manipulated for 3 decades. She found nothing but the icy stare of an auditor closing the books. Slowly, her hands shaking with suppressed rage and humiliation, Diane stepped back. She released her grip on the doorframe. The path into my home was clear. The younger officer offered to escort me inside to ensure the premises were secure. I thanked him, stating I needed to get my infants out of the freezing vehicle immediately. The older deputy instructed Diane to pack her belongings and prepare to leave, noting that they would wait on the street until her vehicle departed the driveway. I walked back to my idling car, the crisp winter air feeling remarkably fresh in my lungs. I carried Leo and Luke up the icy steps, past the 2 deputies, and stepped over the threshold into the warm foyer. The immediate physical danger of the cold was over. The law had superseded the toxic dynamic. But as the heavy front door swung shut behind me, the victory felt entirely hollow. The entryway was not the way I left it. The familiar layout of my home had been erased. Stacked against the wainscoting were dozens of cardboard moving boxes, all labeled with bold black marker indicating Tyler and Lauren's possessions. I walked down the hall, my boots leaving wet tracks on the hardwood floor, and turned my head toward the room I had spent months painting a soft sage green. I stopped dead in my tracks, the heavy car seats pulling at my tired arms as I stared into a space that no longer belonged to my children. I carried the car seats over the threshold and set them gently on the entryway runner. The ambient heat of the interior offered immediate physical relief from the sub-zero Wisconsin winter. But my relief lasted mere seconds. The environment inside my residence was wrong. I recognized the layout, the solid oak flooring and the arched doorways I had fallen in love with 4 years ago. But the space had been hijacked. A cloying, artificial vanilla scent hung heavy in the air, masking the crisp, clean lemon surface spray I always used. The fragrance came from multiple outlet plug-ins scattered across the baseboards. Cardboard shipping boxes formed a barricade down the main corridor. Some were sealed with clear packing tape, while others spilled their contents onto my rugs. Heavy black markers scrawled across the cardboard read, Tyler Office and Lauren Winter Gear. They had not just dropped off a few overnight bags. They had initiated a full-scale residential move. I unzipped the thick fleece buntings protecting Leo and Luke. I brushed my knuckles against their warm, sleeping cheeks to ensure they were breathing comfortably. Leaving them secured in their carriers by the front door, I unbuttoned my heavy winter coat and walked down the hallway. My boots left small puddles of melting snow on the wood. I bypassed the master bedroom and headed straight for the second door on the right. During my second trimester, before the swelling and the blood pressure spikes forced me onto bed rest, I spent 3 weekends preparing this specific room. I taped the baseboards with meticulous precision. I painted the walls a soothing pale sage green. I applied delicate woodland animal decals near the window. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon sitting on the floor with an Allen wrench, carefully assembling 2 identical white wooden cribs, tightening every bolt to ensure my sons would sleep safely. I reached into the dark room and flipped the light switch. The illumination hit my retinas, and the breath hitched in my throat. The white cribs were gone. The matching changing table was missing. The rocking chair where I planned to feed my infants during the night had vanished. In their place, dominating the center of the sage green room, sat a queen-size mattress resting directly on the carpet. A tangled pile of gray bed sheets and a thick duvet covered the center. Lauren had dumped a mountain of unfolded clothing into the corner, burying the baseboards. Empty soda cans and discarded fast food wrappers cluttered the windowsill, where my woodland decals peeled at the edges. The sheer audacity of the scene bypassed my anger and settled into a cold, clinical horror. While I was lying on an operating table undergoing a major surgical procedure to deliver my children, my own brother used power tools to dismantle my baby's beds. My relatives erased my son's existence from the house to make room for a mattress. Footsteps creaked on the staircase behind me. I turned slowly. Tyler stood on the bottom landing, rubbing his eyes. He wore plaid pajama pants and a faded graphic shirt. He ran a hand through his messy hair, attempting to project the casual, easygoing charm he used to charm investors and pacify our parents. Lauren stood 2 steps above him, her arms crossed over her chest. She did not look guilty. She looked profoundly inconvenienced by my arrival. They must have heard the police cruisers pull into the driveway and chosen to hide upstairs, assuming Diane would handle the confrontation. "Hey, hon," Tyler said, letting out a manufactured yawn. "We did not expect you until tomorrow afternoon. Glad you made it out of the maternity ward." I pointed a finger toward the dismantled nursery. "Where is the furniture I purchased for my children?" Tyler waved a hand dismissively, offering a crooked, boyish grin. He stepped closer, stepping over one of his own moving boxes. "We were just getting ahead of the transition," he explained, his tone light and conversational. "You know how chaotic things get with newborns. We figured we would save you the hassle of moving heavy furniture around later. Mom said you were on board with the plan. We decided you should take the master bedroom downstairs, since climbing stairs after a surgery is tough. Lauren and I will take the upper level. It just makes logistical sense." Lauren chimed in from the staircase, her voice laced with defensive entitlement. "We are actually doing you a huge favor, Hannah. You need help, and we need a place to stay while Tyler launches his new consulting business. It is a win for everyone. You should be thanking us instead of glaring like that." Gaslighting is a fascinating tactic. When someone attempts to convince you that a hostile takeover is actually a generous favor, they rely on your natural instinct to avoid conflict. They expect you to engage, to argue the logic, to defend your territory with words. In my billing audits, I never argue with a physician who submits a fabricated expense. I simply deny the claim and issue the penalty. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain the sheer cruelty of taking apart a newborn bed. I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved my smartphone. I opened the clock application and navigated to the timer function. "The sheriff deputies are sitting in their vehicles at the end of the driveway," I stated. My voice echoed in the cluttered hallway, devoid of any sisterly warmth or emotional inflection. "They are waiting for Diane to pack her suitcases. I am going to walk outside in exactly 20 minutes and inform those armed officers that there are 2 additional trespassers refusing to vacate my property." Tyler scoffs, his charming facade slipping. "Come on, Hannah, you are being crazy. This is your family. You are just hormonal from the surgery. Do not do this." I tapped the digital start button on my screen. 19 minutes and 40 seconds, I replied. "If your bodies and your cardboard boxes are not on the other side of my front threshold when this timer reaches 0, I will press formal charges for breaking and entering." Tyler stared at me. He looked past my shoulder, gazing through the living room window, where the red and blue emergency lights continued to flash rhythmically against the snowbanks. The reality of the situation finally pierced his inflated ego. He muttered a sharp curse under his breath and turned back to the stairs. Lauren opened her mouth to protest, her face flushing bright red, but Tyler grabbed her elbow and pulled her upward. "We have to pack," he hissed at her. I turned my back on them. I walked to the entryway runner and sat heavily on the wooden storage bench beside my sleeping twins. For the next 19 minutes, the house filled with the frantic sounds of a forced evacuation. I listened to packing tape ripping cardboard, dragging across hardwood floors, and panicked whispers echoing down the stairwell. Diane emerged from the guest room, pulling a large, rolling suitcase. Her face was set in a tight, furious mask. She did not speak to me. She marched out the front door into the freezing night. Tyler and Lauren followed shortly after, hauling their hastily repacked belongings in disjointed trips. Tyler struggled with the heavy boxes, his breath puffing in the frigid air as he loaded his rusted sedan. Lauren refused to make eye contact, staring straight ahead as she carried her clothes wrapped in garbage bags. When Tyler grabbed the final box, he paused at the threshold. He looked at me, attempting to muster one last shred of dignity. "You are going to regret treating your own blood like this," he warned. I held up my phone screen. 1 minute and 12 seconds. He stepped out. I pushed the heavy fiberglass door shut. I engaged the new brass deadbolt, securing the lock with a satisfying metallic thud. I was alone in my hijacked residence. I left the babies sleeping safely in the warm foyer and walked out to the attached garage. The motion sensor light flickered on. I found the white wooden cribs. They were stacked carelessly like discarded lumber next to my recycling bins. The bolts, screws, and brackets were dumped into a plastic grocery sack sitting on the concrete floor. I would rebuild them. I would sanitize the floors. I would reclaim every square inch of this property. But as I walked back inside and sat on the bench, pulling Leo and Luke into my arms, the clinical detachment began to waver, replaced by a chilling realization. My relatives had lost the physical territory tonight. But entitled people never accept defeat this easily. They view boundaries as a personal insult. They were gone, for now. But 2 days later, a sharp, authoritative knock at my front door would prove that losing the house was merely the beginning of their retaliation, introducing a threat far worse than stolen real estate. It took 48 hours to scrub the artificial vanilla fragrance out of the drywall and rebuild the white wooden cribs. I spent those 2 days moving in a quiet, methodical rhythm. I washed blankets, sanitized hard surfaces, measured formula, and reclaimed every inch of the sage green room. Reassembling infant furniture while recovering from major abdominal surgery is an intense exercise in pain management. But I turned the Allen wrench myself, seating every bolt until the beds were perfectly secure. By Thursday morning, the Colonial felt like a sanctuary again. The heavy cardboard moving boxes were gone, the floors were mopped, and the temperature was set to a comfortable 72 degrees to counter the bitter Wisconsin winter outside. I was sitting in the rocking chair feeding Leo a warm bottle when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front entryway. It was not the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the quick rap of a delivery driver. It was the precise, measured strike of an official visit. I secured Leo against my shoulder to burp him and checked the digital doorbell monitor on my smartphone. A woman in a dark wool peacoat stood on my porch. She held a thick leather portfolio tucked under one arm. A state-issued identification lanyard swung against her chest. I walked to the foyer, adjusting my robe, and unlocked the heavy brass deadbolt. I pulled the fiberglass door open. "Good morning," the woman stated, her face maintaining a careful, practiced neutrality. "Are you Hannah Nelson?" I nodded, shifting my weight to support the infant in my arms. "My name is Investigator Davis," she continued, holding up her identification badge for my inspection. "I am with the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. We received an urgent hotline call this morning regarding the welfare of 2 newborn infants at this address. May I come inside? The crisp winter air suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen had been vacuumed right off the porch. In my line of work, you learn to identify the severity of a threat by the department initiating the inquiry. An insurance denial is an inconvenience. A state-level child welfare investigation is a targeted strike aimed at the foundation of your life. I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please come in, Investigator Davis," I said, my voice remarkably even. "You can leave your boots on the mat." She stepped over the threshold. As the heavy door sealed shut behind her, she pulled a pen from her pocket and opened her portfolio. State workers are required to follow up on every hotline tip, no matter how fabricated it sounds. She explained the allegations logged by the intake operator. An anonymous, concerned relative had called to report a harrowing critical situation. The caller claimed that a deeply unstable, hostile mother, currently experiencing acute postpartum psychosis, had violently evicted her supportive family members into the freezing night. The tipster insisted this erratic mother was refusing to run the furnace in sub-zero temperatures, thereby placing two premature, fragile infants in imminent physical danger. The anatomy of the betrayal crystallized in my chest, sharp and cold as shattered glass. Evicting my brother from my real estate was a property dispute. Weaponizing the state child welfare system was an act of war. Diane and Lauren had dialed a government hotline fully aware that a sudden investigation could result in infants being removed from a home and placed into emergency foster care. They were willing to subject Leo and Luke to systemic trauma risk, my legal custody, and destroy my entire life simply because I denied Tyler a free mattress in a room he did not own. They assumed the sudden appearance of a social worker would induce a panic attack. They expected the investigator to find a weeping, sleep-deprived, hysterical woman living in a chaotic environment. They calculated that my stress would validate their false report, forcing me to call my mother and beg for her help to appease the state. The last remaining thread of daughterly obligation I held for Diane snapped. The emotional tie flatlined, leaving nothing but a sterile dial tone. They were no longer my relatives. They were a liability. And I treat liabilities with zero emotion. Investigator Davis looked around the foyer, her eyes scanning for the freezing temperatures and the chaos she had been briefed to expect. Instead, she encountered the ambient warmth of a well-regulated heating system and the faint smell of lemon surface cleaner. "Let me show you the house," I offered calmly. I guided her into the kitchen. The granite countertops gleamed. The pantry door stood open, displaying aligned rows of premium infant formula sterilized bottles, distilled water gallons, and neatly stacked packages of diapers. I walked her upstairs to the nursery. Luke was sleeping soundly in his pristine crib. Leo rested quietly against my shoulder, his breathing even and relaxed. The sage green room was immaculate, bathed in soft morning light and registering a perfect temperature on the digital baby monitor mounted on the wall. Davis took a few notes, her rigid professional posture beginning to soften. The visual evidence directly contradicted the anonymous tip, but state protocols require documentation, not just visual confirmation. I shifted Leo to my other arm and opened the top drawer of the changing table. I pulled out a thick, heavy-duty binder divided by colored plastic tabs. I handed it to the investigator. "I am a medical billing specialist," I explained, watching her open the cover. "I audit hospital claims for a living. I track data." Davis flipped through the pages. The binder contained every piece of paper generated since my hospital admission. The first tab held the official discharge summaries bearing the signatures of the attending obstetrician and the neonatal pediatrician, clearing both me and the twins for independent home care. The second tab contained detailed color-coded tracking sheets. I had charted every single feeding, broken down by the exact ounce and the specific hour. I logged every wet diaper, every bowel movement, and every daily weight fluctuation. The final tab held the contact information for our primary care clinic, the emergency room protocols, and the receipts for the specialized formula. It was an irrefutable paper trail of supreme maternal competence. Investigator Davis stopped writing. She closed the heavy binder and handed it back to me. The guarded, investigative tension in her eyes evaporated, replaced by the weary understanding of a public servant who realizes her time has been intentionally wasted. She recognized a retaliatory strike when she saw one. Social workers handle vindictive family members weaponizing the hotline system every single day. "You have a beautiful, safe home, Ms. Nelson," she said, her tone shifting from an interrogation to an apology. "Your children are clearly thriving, and your record-keeping is incredible. I am going to code this tip as unfounded and malicious. The case will be closed before I even drive back to my office. I am very sorry for the intrusion today." I walked her back down the oak staircase. I thanked her for doing her job and wished her a safe drive on the icy roads. When her sedan pulled out of my driveway, I locked the deadbolt again. The state intervention had failed. Diane and Lauren had aimed the most terrifying weapon available at a new mother, and it had bounced off my meticulous documentation. My family had played their highest card and lost the hand in 20 minutes. But toxic people do not pause to reflect when their schemes fail. They simply change jurisdictions. Since the legal authorities refused to punish me, my mother decided to seek a conviction in a different court. She turned to the one tribunal where facts do not matter, evidence is optional, and the loudest victim always wins the verdict. I set Leo down in his swing and walked into the kitchen to wash the empty bottle. As the warm water hit the plastic, my smartphone on the granite counter lit up. The device vibrated aggressively against the stone. It buzzed once, then 3 times in rapid succession, then became a continuous, uninterrupted hum of incoming notifications. The small-town gossip machine had been activated, and my mother was broadcasting a brand new narrative to anyone with an internet connection. The smartphone vibrated relentlessly against the cold granite countertop. It produced a harsh, sustained hum that pierced the quiet tranquility of my reclaimed kitchen. I turned off the warm water faucet and reached for a cotton towel, drying my hands with deliberate slowness. In the medical billing industry, a sudden influx of urgent notifications usually signifies a systemic coding error or a rejected batch of high-value claims. You learn to brace yourself before looking at the screen. I unlocked my device. The barrage of alerts did not originate from my professional email or the child welfare department. They were social media tags, direct messages, and missed calls. My mother had realized that the legal system and the state authorities would not serve as her personal enforcement arm. Therefore, she pivoted to a different jurisdiction. She took her grievances to the court of public opinion, where evidence is irrelevant and the most theatrical victim secures the favorable verdict. I opened the local community Facebook group. Our suburban Wisconsin town boasts a population of around 10,000 people, and nearly half of them monitor this specific digital bulletin board. It is typically a mundane space, utilized for advertising high school bake sales, recommending local plumbers, or posting blurry photographs of stray dogs. Today, it was the staging ground for a calculated smear campaign. Diane had published a lengthy, tearful essay, accompanied by a photograph taken years ago, featuring her and me smiling at a holiday dinner. The text was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She did not mention the dismantled cribs, the sub-zero lockout, or the retaliatory call to state investigators. Instead, she painted a vague, devastating portrait of maternal heartbreak. She wrote about the agonizing pain of daughters who turn their backs on their family. She lamented the tragedy of a grandmother being banned from seeing her new infant grandsons. She asked the community for prayers, claiming she was navigating a dark season of rejection and simply wanted to keep her family united under one roof. She framed my boundary as a sudden, inexplicable act of cruelty. She cast herself as the wounded matriarch suffering in dignified silence. The comments section was a predictable chorus of outrage and sympathy. Lauren, playing her supporting role with seamless precision, chimed in near the top of the thread. She wrote a paragraphs-long response detailing the immense stress of being thrown out into the freezing cold with zero warning while Tyler was trying so hard to build his consulting business. Lauren claimed they had only moved into my house to provide postpartum care for a struggling single mother, and their generosity was met with a heartless eviction. The digital mob responded exactly as my relatives intended. The residents of a small Midwestern town run on a very specific social currency. They value outward harmony, polite interactions, and the unwavering appearance of familial loyalty. Disrupting that harmony is considered a severe offense. Within an hour, my personal inbox flooded with messages from people who had only heard one side of the ledger. Aunt Helen sent a lengthy text containing 3 different Bible verses about honoring thy mother and father, followed by a heavy-handed lecture about how life is too short to hold grudges. A cousin I had not spoken to in 4 years left a voicemail, his voice dripping with condescension, telling me I needed to seek psychological help because locking my own brother out was a sick thing to do. Old family friends sent messages coated in sugary guilt, offering to mediate a sit-down conversation so I could apologize and mend the broken fences. They were applying the maximum level of social pressure available. They expected the weight of the town's disapproval to crush my resolve. Sitting at my kitchen island reading through the relentless notifications, I experienced a visceral, psychological withdrawal. For 33 years, my core identity within this family was the reliable, sensible daughter. I was the one who fixed the mistakes. I was the one who balanced the checkbook and maintained the peace. The sensation of being universally perceived as the antagonist felt like a physical ache in my chest. The urge to defend myself was profound. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard. I wanted to type out a point-by-point rebuttal. I wanted to upload the photograph of my son's disassembled bed stacked in the cold garage. I wanted to publish the police report from the midnight lockout and the incident number from the baseless child welfare investigation. I possessed the documentation to destroy their false narrative instantly. I wanted to prove to the neighborhood that I was not the villain. I wanted to clear my name. But true boundaries require you to sit in the extreme discomfort of being misunderstood. If I replied to Diane's post, I would be engaging in her chosen arena. I would be providing the exact dramatic friction she craved. Narcissistic relatives do not care if the attention is positive or negative, as long as you are supplying a reaction. A public argument would validate her premise that this was a messy family dispute rather than a clear-cut case of property theft and trespassing. I closed the keyboard. I took a deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of the lemon surface cleaner, and chose a much colder course of action. I engaged the screen capture function on my smartphone. I systematically photographed Diane's original essay. I captured Lauren's fabricated timeline in the comments. I saved the text messages from Aunt Helen and the voicemails from the distant cousins. I documented every single piece of digital slander, organizing the image files into a secure folder on my cloud drive. In the billing industry, you do not throw away a rejected claim. You archive it, because a documented pattern of fraudulent behavior is invaluable when the situation inevitably escalates to a higher authority. I refused to issue a public defense. I did not block my relatives, and I did not delete my social media profiles. I simply remained silent. Silence is an incredibly frustrating weapon when deployed against people who rely on your emotional exhaustion. My lack of response starved their narrative of oxygen. Without me fighting back, Diane had no fresh material to fuel her victimhood. Her supporters would eventually scroll past her complaints, seeking the next local controversy. By refusing to attend the public trial she orchestrated, I rendered her entire performance useless. I set the smartphone face down on the granite counter. The house was quiet again. Leo and Luke were resting peacefully upstairs. The social pressure was uncomfortable, but it could not breach my heavy brass deadbolt. I had survived the lockout. I had defeated the child welfare investigator, and I was successfully ignoring the digital smear campaign. I felt a brief, passing moment of stability. Then my laptop chimed from the home office down the hall. It was a distinct, sharp alert tone. It was not a social media notification or a text message from a misguided aunt. It was the specific audio chime tied to my secure financial monitoring software. I walked into the office and touched the trackpad to wake the monitor. An urgent email from my primary credit reporting bureau illuminated the screen. The subject line indicated a hard inquiry had been executed against my Social Security number. I opened the encrypted portal and reviewed the details. A new high-limit credit card application had just been approved in my name. The billing address associated with the fresh account was not my Colonial on Marigold Drive. The physical card was currently being expedited to a short-term rental unit across town. It was the exact address where Tyler and Lauren were currently staying. My mother had realized the gossip campaign was not breaking my spirit, so she stopped attacking my reputation and initiated a direct strike on my financial infrastructure. The glowing LCD screen illuminated the dim home office, casting a pale blue light across my desk. The email displayed in my secure financial portal was not a simple marketing offer or a routine balance update. It was a formal welcome letter from a premier national bank congratulating me on the approval of a Platinum Rewards Visa signature account. The bold typography near the top of the message highlighted a staggering credit limit of $10,000. I leaned forward in my ergonomic chair, my eyes tracing the digital text. I had not applied for a new line of credit. My financial portfolio was carefully curated, and I maintained a strict budget to ensure my mortgage and living expenses were always covered, with room to spare. I scrolled down to the bottom of the approval notice, searching for the logistical details. The system listed a delivery destination for the physical plastic. The address was not my Colonial on Marigold Drive. It was an apartment complex on Elm Street, located on the opposite side of our Wisconsin suburb. It was the exact short-term rental unit Tyler and Lauren had secured after I forced them off my property. A heavy, chilling realization settled into my stomach. Securing a premium credit account requires more than a simple name and a birth date. The issuing institution demands a verifiable Social Security number, a gross annual income estimate, and a clean lending history. Tyler possessed none of those qualifications. His credit score was a wasteland of defaulted auto loans and unpaid utility collections. Diane, however, possessed the necessary keys to bypass the security gates. 15 years ago, when I was an 18-year-old high school senior navigating university financial aid applications, my mother handled the household paperwork. She kept a pristine ledger of our family data. She always prided herself on her sharp memory. She had memorized my 9-digit Social Security number, storing it away in her mind. Now she had retrieved those 9 digits to commit outright fraud. She realized her emotional manipulation had failed. She knew the child welfare investigation had bounced off my meticulous record-keeping. Stripped of her usual weapons, Diane resorted to stealing my identity to float Tyler's ongoing failures. She intended to rack up $10,000 in consumer debt, secure in the knowledge that the creditors would hunt me down for the repayment. She was willing to destroy my pristine credit score, jeopardize my professional licensing as a financial auditor, and steal resources meant for Leo and Luke, all to protect her golden child from facing the consequences of his own chronic unemployment. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a dismantled nursery. This was a Class H felony in the state of Wisconsin. In my profession, when you uncover a coordinated scheme to defraud a healthcare network, you do not call the perpetrator to ask for an explanation. You lock down the compromised systems, and you build a prosecutorial case. I closed the email and opened a new secure browser window. My transition from a wounded daughter to a clinical investigator was instantaneous. The residual ache of familial betrayal vanished, replaced by the cold mechanical efficiency of a woman securing her perimeter. First, I navigated to the official portals for the 3 major credit reporting bureaus. I bypassed the standard fraud alerts and initiated a hard, permanent security freeze on my file across Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I established complex alphanumeric PIN codes, ensuring no further inquiries could be executed without my explicit authorization. Next, I located the toll-free fraud prevention number listed at the bottom of the bank approval email. I dialed the digits holding the phone to my ear while the automated system routed my call. A representative named David answered the line. I maintained a steady, authoritative tone, identifying myself as the victim of active identity theft. I provided the reference number from the email and verified my identity using secondary authentication methods that Diane could not possibly know, such as the exact balance of my primary checking account and the origination date of my home mortgage. David confirmed the fraudulent application had been submitted online merely hours ago. I instructed him to terminate the account immediately before the physical card could be embossed or mailed to the Elm Street apartment. I requested written confirmation of the closure and a formal declaration that I held zero liability for the fraudulent application. The bank representative complied, noting the fraud flag in their global system. The $10,000 lifeline Diane had attempted to steal was severed before Tyler could spend a single cent. My mother and brother would be sitting in their rented apartment waiting for an envelope that would never arrive. I did not stop with the banking institution. I opened the federal government identity theft reporting portal. I typed out a comprehensive, chronological narrative of the events detailing the unauthorized use of my Social Security number and listing Diane Nelson as the primary suspect, with Tyler Nelson as the intended beneficiary. I generated the official Federal Trade Commission affidavit, saving the encrypted PDF to my local hard drive. Then I navigated to the digital reporting system for the county sheriff department. I filed a supplemental report linking the identity theft incident to the prior midnight trespassing call at my address. I printed hard copies of every document: the approval email, the credit freeze confirmations, the federal affidavit, and the local police incident number all went into the thick manila folder that sat on the corner of my desk. The folder was growing. The paper trail was becoming an ironclad fortress. The most instinctual reaction to a stolen identity is confrontation. The average person would immediately dial the perpetrator, screaming into the receiver, demanding answers, and threatening legal action. I refused to grant Diane that satisfaction. A confrontation acts as a warning system. If I texted her, if I unleashed my justified anger, I would only be handing her crucial intelligence. She would know I had discovered the scheme. She would have time to craft an alibi, delete her browser history, or invent a story about a mistaken application. Silence is the ultimate tactical advantage. By choosing not to react, I allowed Diane to believe her criminal enterprise was successful. I let her operate under the delusion that she held the upper hand, while I quietly stacked the evidence required to dismantle her life. I was no longer playing a dramatic family game. I was methodically preparing a trap. I walked out of the home office and checked the digital monitor in the hallway. Leo and Luke were still sleeping soundly in the reclaimed sage green nursery. They were safe. Their future was secure. I turned off the hallway light and returned to the kitchen to pour a glass of cold water. The ensuing days were marked by an eerie, unbroken quiet. The social media smear campaign dwindled as the town residents grew bored of my refusal to participate in the public spectacle. My smartphone remained silent, devoid of the frantic, manipulative messages that had characterized the previous week. It was the calm before a very specific, calculated storm. My relatives were waiting for the credit card. When the mail carrier failed to deliver the Platinum Visa to the Elm Street apartment, Tyler would inevitably run out of funding. The financial pressure would mount. Diane would realize the fraudulent account had been neutralized, though she would not know how much evidence I possessed. Desperation breeds sloppy tactics. Stripped of their stolen credit line, they would be forced to seek an alternative method to extract resources from me. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, my phone screen finally lit up. The incoming text message was not from Diane or Tyler. It was from Aunt Helen, the same woman who had previously bombarded me with religious guilt and demands for a swift reconciliation. The text was surprisingly brief, stripped of her usual heavy-handed lectures. She stated she missed me. She claimed she wanted to hear my side of the story without any other family members present. She invited me to meet her for a cup of coffee at a local neutral diner downtown, promising that my mother would not be attending. It was a blatant, transparent olive branch. It was also a poorly constructed snare. My relatives assumed I was exhausted by the isolation. They calculated that a lonely postpartum mother would leap at the chance to explain herself to a seemingly sympathetic audience. They intended to pull me out of my secure fortress and corner me in a public venue. I looked at the text message for a long moment. I did not decline the invitation. Instead, I picked up the manila folder from my office desk and slid it into my oversized leather tote bag. If they wanted to stage a public intervention, I was more than willing to attend. I replied to Aunt Helen, confirming the time and the location, fully prepared to deliver a presentation they would never forget. I needed to secure my perimeter before stepping onto the battlefield. Prior to leaving the house, I contacted a trusted neighbor, a retired pediatric nurse named Sarah. She had offered her assistance multiple times during my difficult pregnancy, dropping off meals and checking my blood pressure when the swelling became severe. Sarah arrived at my colonial early that Thursday morning, bringing a thermos of tea and a reassuring smile. I handed her the spare key and provided strict instructions to keep the heavy brass deadbolt locked while I was gone. I told her not to open the door for anyone except emergency services. With Leo and Luke safely guarded by a medical professional, I picked up my oversized leather tote bag. The thick manila folder rested securely inside the lining, containing the certified property deed, the police dispatch reports, and the federal identity theft affidavit. The drive to the downtown district took 15 minutes. The gray Wisconsin sky hung low over the bare trees, threatening another layer of heavy snow. I parked my vehicle in the icy lot of a local establishment known as the Copper Skillet. It was a classic Midwestern diner featuring red vinyl booths, laminated menus, and a reliable morning clientele consisting mostly of retired locals and blue-collar workers seeking a warm breakfast. In my younger years, an invitation like the one Aunt Helen sent would have caused my heart to race with intense anxiety. I used to agonize over every family fracture, twisting my own logic into knots while trying to draft the perfect apology to restore the peace. I carried the heavy burden of being the designated peacemaker. Today, my pulse remained as steady as the digital clock glowing on my dashboard. I understood the mechanics of a coordinated ambush. Aunt Helen promising my mother would not attend the meeting was the precise indicator that Diane had orchestrated the entire event. I stepped out of the car, pulled my wool coat tight against the biting winter wind, and walked toward the glass entrance. The brass bell above the door chimed a cheerful, ordinary greeting. The interior air smelled of dark roast coffee, fried potatoes, and melting snow tracked in on heavy boots. The diner hummed with the low murmur of morning conversations and the sharp clatter of silverware against porcelain plates. I scanned the dining room, looking past the crowded counter. I spotted Aunt Helen, sitting in a corner booth near the back, wearing her familiar quilted jacket. She was not alone. The trap was laid out exactly as I had calculated. Sliding into the curved vinyl seat across from Aunt Helen was my mother, Diane. Her hair was styled perfectly, and she wore a solemn, dignified expression. She was playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch, forced to stage a desperate intervention for an errant child. Seated next to her was Tyler. He leaned back with his arms draped over the top edge of the booth, exuding the unearned confidence of a man who believed he held the winning hand. Lauren sat beside him, nursing a ceramic mug, her eyes darting toward the entrance to track my arrival. They chose a busy, well-lit public venue for a very specific, tactical reason. My relatives banked their entire strategy on my lifelong aversion to public embarrassment. Throughout my childhood and deep into my 30s, I would swallow my own discomfort rather than risk making a scene in front of strangers. They assumed the presence of waitstaff and neighboring customers would act as a behavioral muzzle. They expected me to comply, nod, and fold under the collective weight of their silent disapproval. They planned for me to sit down, lower my voice, and surrender my assets, just to make the awkward tension evaporate. I walked down the narrow aisle, my boots treading softly on the checkered linoleum floor. I did not shrink. I did not avert my gaze to the floor. I approached the table and stood at the edge of the booth, looking down at the four faces staring back at me. Aunt Helen offered a weak, apologetic smile and shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unable to meet my eyes. Diane placed a hand over her heart, letting out a soft, theatrical sigh designed to project immense maternal relief. Tyler sat forward, resting his elbows on the sticky table surface. "Sit down," Hannah Tyler instructed, using a firm tone usually reserved for a disobedient subordinate. "You look exhausted. We need to have a serious talk about reality." I did not take off my heavy wool coat. I slid into the empty space on the vinyl bench opposite Tyler and Lauren, placing my heavy leather tote bag right next to my hip. I folded my hands on the table and waited. I treated the moment the exact same way I treat a meeting with a hospital administrator attempting to justify fraudulent billing practices. I let them do the talking. Guilty people always fill the silence with the evidence you need to condemn them. "We are doing this because we care about you," Tyler began, adopting a tone of manufactured concern. "The last 2 weeks have been a disaster for this family. You locked Mom out in the snow. You involved the police over a simple misunderstanding. You are acting paranoid. Mom is sick with worry, and quite frankly, we are all questioning your ability to handle things right now. You are a single woman with 2 brand new infants. You underwent a major surgery. You are clearly not thinking straight." Lauren nodded in agreement, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with a manicured fingernail. "It is just too much pressure for one person," she added, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "Maintaining a 3-bedroom colonial property, paying the rising property taxes, fixing the roof, raising twins alone. You are going to drown out there, Hannah. We want to lift that burden off your shoulders. We want to help you survive." Tyler reached into the inner pocket of his winter jacket. He withdrew a folded piece of lined notebook paper and slid it across the Formica table toward me. It was not a printed legal document drafted by a licensed attorney. It was a handwritten page, scrawled in blue ink, featuring a jagged edge where it had been torn from a cheap spiral binder. I looked down at the paper. The staggering delusion written on those blue lines was breathtaking. Tyler had drafted a makeshift contract. The opening paragraph demanded that I sign a quitclaim deed transferring the title of my home to him and Lauren immediately. In exchange, the document stated that they would graciously assume the financial responsibilities of the estate. The second paragraph outlined my new living arrangement. Tyler proposed that I would relocate to the unfinished basement with my newborn sons. The basement was a space featuring exposed concrete walls, a cold floor, and a single egress window. He set a monthly rent figure that I would be required to pay directly to him for the privilege of living under my own floorboards. I read the number he chose for the rent. He requested $800 a month, a figure that miraculously matched his previous apartment lease that he could no longer afford. He intended to use my money to pay the mortgage on a house he stole from me. The document concluded with a signature line bearing my printed name and a witness line, presumably placed there for Aunt Helen to sign. Tyler had actually sat down at a table, found a blue pen, and written out a detailed plan to steal my real estate and charge me rent to inhabit a damp basement while I raised his nephews. He believed this notebook paper held genuine legal authority. He truly believed that if he presented it in a crowded diner surrounded by disappointed relatives, I would pick up a pen and sign away my life savings out of sheer intimidation. I read the blue ink twice to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. The diner continued to buzz around us. A waitress carrying a heavy tray of plates rushed past our booth, oblivious to the extortion occurring over the salt and pepper shakers. The smell of fried bacon drifted through the air. The 4 of them watched my face intently. They were waiting for the familiar, compliant Hannah to crack. They expected the tears to well up in my eyes. They waited for me to whisper a broken apology, to beg for a compromise, or to admit that I was too weak to manage my own life. They anticipated a quiet, desperate surrender. Diane leaned forward, her eyes brimming with manufactured tears. "Just sign it, sweetheart," she urged softly, playing the role of the benevolent savior. "Let your brother handle the hard things for a while. We just want our family back together. You do not have to carry this heavy load all by yourself." They stared at me across the booth, certain they had won the psychological warfare. They thought they had cornered a vulnerable, terrified target who would cave under the pressure of a public audience. They did not realize they had just invited a forensic auditor to review their ledger. I did not reach for the pen lying next to the notebook paper. I did not lower my eyes or whisper an apology. I unclasped the metal latch on my oversized leather tote bag and reached inside. I withdrew the thick manila folder from the interior lining of my tote bag. I did not reach for the blue ink pen resting near the salt shaker. I did not touch Tyler's torn notebook paper. I simply slid his handwritten extortion attempt to the far edge of the table, dismissing it with a flick of my wrist. I placed my organized files squarely in the center of the Formica surface. The plastic tabs clicked sharply against the table. Diane's manufactured weeping ceased instantly. Her theatrical performance halted as she stared at the official-looking documents. Aunt Helen leaned forward, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. Tyler frowned, his boyish confidence fracturing, as he realized I was not following the script they had rehearsed. I opened the cover. In the medical billing profession, an itemized statement is the ultimate source of truth. A hospital cannot simply demand a flat sum for a general procedure. The administration must list every single bandage, every dose of intravenous medication, and every minute of operating room time. I treated my familial obligations with the exact same rigorous accounting. Over the years, I had quietly logged every financial bailout. I pulled out a single sheet of printer paper. It was a detailed spreadsheet, categorized by year, featuring clean columns and bold headers. I placed it over Tyler's ridiculous basement rental contract. I did not raise my voice above the ambient clatter of the copper skillet. I spoke in the flat, clinical tone of an auditor denying a fabricated appeal. I began reading the line items aloud to the booth. I listed the $4,000 I provided to prevent Tyler's eviction in 2019. I noted the $2,000 required to repair Lauren's transmission the following spring. I detailed the frequent grocery transfers, the cellular phone bills I absorbed, and the property taxes I covered for our parents so they could continue funding his failed landscaping venture. As the numerical figures echoed across the vinyl seating, the atmosphere shifted. Tyler's jaw tightened into a rigid line. Lauren crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. Aunt Helen sat frozen, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her mouth. She had arrived expecting to mediate a petty sibling dispute over real estate, only to be presented with a decade-long record of financial parasitism. I reached the bottom row of the document. I read the final cumulative sum. Over the past 10 years, I had funneled $42,680 into Tyler's lifestyle. It was a staggering figure. Aunt Helen gasped quietly, her eyes widening as the math fully registered. Diane opened her mouth to argue, attempting to deploy her usual defense about maintaining family unity, but I held up my hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I informed her the ledger was officially closed. The deficit was permanent. I owed them nothing. Tyler attempted to recover his shattered posture. He scoffed, shaking his head and claiming that past gifts had nothing to do with the current housing crisis. He insisted I was just bringing up ancient history to avoid helping him today. I ignored his weak deflection. I reached into the manila folder one more time. It was time to deliver the pebble that would shatter their entire reality. I withdrew 3 clipped pages. I placed them deliberately on top of the printed spreadsheet. The top page featured the official crest of the County Sheriff Department. The second page was the Federal Trade Commission identity theft affidavit. The third page was the printed email confirmation from the National Banking Institution detailing the fraudulent $10,000 credit card application. I slid the clipped stack directly toward my mother. Diane looked down. Her eyes scanned the bold text. The color drained rapidly from her cheeks, leaving her skin an ashen, sickly gray. The dignified matriarch vanished, replaced by the terrified posture of a cornered suspect. I kept my gaze locked on my mother, refusing to let her look away. I explained the contents of those documents to the silent booth. I detailed how she utilized my Social Security number to apply for a platinum visa. I recited the precise delivery destination on Elm Street, pointing out that it matched Tyler's new short-term rental unit perfectly. I informed them that the account was already frozen, the physical plastic canceled, and the internal fraud department notified. The diner continued to buzz around us, filled with the smell of fried bacon and brewing coffee, but our corner booth felt like a vacuum. Aunt Helen pressed a hand over her mouth, staring at her sister in unadulterated horror. Stealing from a postpartum daughter crossed a line that even the most dedicated small-town gossip could not excuse. The religious lectures Aunt Helen had prepared died in her throat. She was sitting next to a felon. Diane tried to speak. Her voice emerged as a faint, trembling whisper. She claimed it was a mistake, a simple misunderstanding, a desperate attempt to help her son secure his footing. She reached out, attempting to grasp my wrist. I pulled my arm back, placing my hands in my lap. I leaned across the table and delivered my final terms with surgical precision. I stated that the documents resting on the Formica surface were merely copies. The originals were secured in a fireproof safe, and the digital files were logged with the federal government. I told them that if they ever contacted me again, the truce would end. If they ever approached my children, sent another harassing text message, or made any future attempt to access my financial infrastructure, I would instruct the detective to pursue full felony charges. I promised to testify against her in open court, ensuring the entire county knew exactly why she was standing before a judge. I established an impenetrable boundary. No phone calls, no uninvited visits, no third-party messengers. Tyler sat paralyzed in the booth. His smug demeanor had evaporated. Lauren stared at her empty ceramic mug, unable to look at her mother-in-law. They realized their primary asset had just become their most dangerous liability. I had transformed from a compliant resource into a prosecutorial threat. The money tree was dead, and the soil was salted. I gathered my empty folder, leaving the printed copies on the table for them to digest. I stood up, buttoned my heavy wool coat, and picked up my leather tote bag. I looked down at Aunt Helen, thanking her politely for the coffee invitation. I suggested she find a better class of dining companions in the future. I walked down the narrow aisle, the checkered linoleum floor squeaking softly under my winter boots. The brass bell chimed a cheerful farewell as I pushed through the glass entrance and stepped out into the biting Wisconsin winter. I started my vehicle and drove back to my warm, secure Colonial on Marigold Drive. Sarah greeted me at the door, confirming that Leo and Luke had slept peacefully through my entire absence. I thanked her, paid her for her time, and locked the heavy deadbolt behind her. I felt a profound sense of closure. The ledgers were balanced, the truth was exposed to a neutral witness, and the threat of financial sabotage was neutralized. I believed the war was over. But as night fell and the temperature plummeted to single digits, I failed to anticipate the predictable nature of a humiliated man. Tyler had lost his dignity, his free housing, and his stolen funding in a single afternoon. When an entitled person is stripped of their weapons, they do not surrender gracefully. They resort to brute force, and a dark, freezing property line offered the perfect cover for a physical attack. The satisfaction of drawing a hard boundary lasts only as long as your opponent respects the newly established rules. In the billing industry, you learn a hard lesson very early in your career. Closing a loophole does not typically cause a dedicated fraudster to surrender and walk away. Instead, blocking their primary route often prompts them to try a blunt force attack. My confrontation at the downtown diner effectively neutralized my mother and her stolen credit scheme. I spent the remainder of that Thursday enjoying the profound, uninterrupted silence of my Colonial on Marigold Drive. I fed Leo, and Luke folded warm laundry and watched the gray Wisconsin sky transition into a pitch-black winter night. The local meteorologist had issued a severe weather advisory during the evening news broadcast. A heavy Arctic front was sweeping across the Midwest. The ambient temperature was projected to plummet well below zero by midnight, accompanied by fierce wind chills capable of inducing frostbite within minutes. The kind of weather that forces infrastructure to work at maximum capacity just to maintain baseline survival conditions. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the steady, rhythmic hum of my forced air heating system abruptly ceased. The sudden quiet was jarring. Usually, the furnace cycled off with a distinct, gentle click after reaching the target temperature on the thermostat. This stoppage sounded entirely different. It was a harsh mechanical clunk, followed by absolute stillness in the ductwork. At first, I assumed it was a routine pause in the heating cycle. I remained in the nursery rocking chair, holding a sleeping Leo against my chest, waiting for the blower motor to engage again. 15 minutes passed. The ventilation grates remained silent. A subtle, creeping chill began to seep through the hardwood floorboards. The ambient warmth of the nursery started to dissipate, replaced by an aggressive frost pressing against the exterior window panes. I placed Leo back into his crib, securing his swaddle, and walked into the hallway. The digital thermostat mounted on the drywall confirmed my growing suspicion. The target was set to 72 degrees. The current indoor reading had already dropped to 65 and was steadily declining. A flashing red error code illuminated the small liquid crystal screen, indicating a total loss of communication with the external condenser unit. Fear is a biological response, but panic is a choice. When the environment turns hostile, you must prioritize the most vulnerable assets immediately. I did not waste time calling my relatives to accuse them, nor did I stand in the hallway wringing my hands. I walked into the master bedroom storage closet and retrieved a heavy-duty, oil-filled electric space heater. I wheeled the radiator into my room, plugged it into an isolated electrical circuit, and closed the thick wooden door to trap the generating heat. I returned to the nursery, bundled my sons in extra layers of fleece clothing, and carefully transferred them into my bed. I arranged thick pillows around them, establishing a secure, warm perimeter. The electric radiator ticked as the internal oil heated, generating a localized pocket of safety against the dropping temperature of the house. With my children protected, I needed to diagnose the primary mechanical failure. I pulled on my heavy insulated snow boots, zipped up my down parka, and retrieved a high-lumen tactical flashlight from the kitchen utility drawer. I unlocked the side door deadbolt and stepped out into the frozen yard. The wind hit my face like a physical blow, stealing the breath directly from my lungs. The cold was abrasive, stinging my cheeks and watering my eyes. I waded through knee-deep snowdrifts, rounding the brick corner of the house, to reach the external heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment pad. I aimed the bright light beam at the large metal housing. The unit had not succumbed to the harsh winter weather. It had been systematically and intentionally destroyed. The thick, weatherproof electrical conduit connecting the machine to the main house power supply was sliced clean through. The exposed copper wiring frayed outward, glinting in the harsh glare of my flashlight. Heavy-duty bolt cutters had been used to sever the vital lifeline. Below the severed cables, the louvered metal intake grate was smashed inward, severely dented by repeated strikes from a heavy, blunt object. The fan blades inside were jammed against the bent metal housing. I stood in the biting wind, tracing the snowy perimeter with my light. The fresh powder around the concrete pad was trampled by large, aggressive boot prints. This was not a random act of vandalism committed by bored local teenagers seeking a thrill. It was a targeted, calculated strike. Tyler had realized that financial extortion was impossible after his humiliating defeat at the diner. Stripped of his leverage, he resorted to physical intimidation. His logic was brutally transparent and deeply sinister. He monitored the weather advisory. He knew the temperature was dropping to dangerous sub-zero levels. He assumed a single mother with premature infants would break down in terror when the heat died in the middle of the night. He expected me to pack my bags, load the car seats, and flee to a nearby hotel to keep my babies from freezing to death. Once the Colonial was abandoned, the property would be highly vulnerable. He could break a rear window, change the locks a second time, or establish physical residency by squatting inside, while I was trapped in a rented room. He was attempting to freeze me out of my own territory. A sharp flicker of genuine terror sparked in my chest. My own brother was willing to subject his 3-day-old nephews to freezing temperatures just to win a real estate dispute. He had crossed the threshold from entitled financial parasitism into active physical endangerment. He was willing to risk the health of 2 infants to secure a free roof over his head. My breath plumed in the flashlight beam. I lowered the light and retraced my steps through the snowdrifts. I re-entered the house, secured the deadbolt, and leaned against the cold fiberglass door. The interior air was growing colder by the minute, dropping into the low 50s, but my internal resolve solidified into iron. I refused to abandon my property. I refused to let him win through domestic terrorism. I pulled out my smartphone and searched for local 24-hour emergency repair services. I located a commercial company operating 2 towns over that advertised round-the-clock winter dispatch. I dialed the number, listening to the phone ring multiple times before a sleepy dispatcher answered the line. I explained the severed conduit and the smashed grate. The dispatcher warned me that an emergency residential response at 2 a.m. during a severe weather advisory carried an exorbitant premium fee. She quoted an hourly rate and a travel surcharge that would have devastated a normal monthly budget. In my accounting firm, an emergency operational expense is simply a required line item to maintain business continuity. I provided my credit card number over the phone and authorized the massive charge without a second thought. I instructed them to send their best technician immediately. I walked back into the master bedroom. The oil-filled space heater was radiating a steady, comforting warmth throughout the enclosed space. Leo and Luke slept soundly, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect unison, blissfully oblivious to the plunging temperatures in the rest of the structure. I sat on the edge of the mattress, keeping my heavy coat zipped up, and watched the digital clock glow on the nightstand. 1 hour later, a heavy-duty commercial work truck pulled into my driveway, its amber hazard lights flashing rhythmically against the snow. I met the technician at the side entrance. He was a broad-shouldered man wearing heavy canvas coveralls and a thick wool beanie. I guided him to the damaged unit and held the flashlight steady while he inspected the sabotage. He examined the severed conduit and the smashed grate, shaking his head in silent disgust. He confirmed my diagnosis. This was intentional, aggressive vandalism. He spent the next 45 minutes braving the extreme cold, splicing a new electrical line, securing the sensitive connection with weatherproof housing, and carefully bending the intake grate away from the internal fan blades. When he finally flipped the exterior breaker switch, the furnace roared back to life. A few seconds later, blessed warm air began pumping through the interior vents. I paid the technician his quoted premium, added a substantial gratuity for his swift arrival in dangerous conditions, and thanked him profusely for his service. I locked the side door for the final time that night. Tyler had played his most aggressive, dangerous hand. He thought he had executed the perfect crime under the cover of a pitch-black winter storm. He believed he could freeze me out without leaving a single trace of his presence on the property. He assumed he was an invisible ghost in the snow. However, arrogant men often overlook the smallest, most critical details when they are blinded by their own rage. While my brother was busy swinging a blunt object at my intake grate, hyper-focused on destroying the machinery, he failed to notice the small, camouflage-patterned plastic device mounted directly above his head on the brick wall, silently recording every single swing of his weapon. The ambient air inside the Colonial slowly began to circulate, carrying the faint metallic scent of heated dust as the furnace burned through the residual cold. The commercial repair technician was packing his heavy tools into a canvas bag on the snowy concrete pad. I stood on the side porch watching him secure the latch on his toolbox. Before he could turn to walk back to his service truck, I asked him to wait for one moment. I reached up toward the brick wall adjacent to the newly spliced electrical conduit. During my 3rd trimester, when the blood pressure spikes forced me into strict bed rest, the sheer monotony of being confined to the living room couch became overwhelming. I spent hours staring out the rear windows, watching the pine tree line marking the edge of my property. Occasionally, a family of white-tailed deer would wander into the yard to forage in the early twilight. Seeking a small distraction from the high-risk pregnancy, I ordered 2 motion-activated trail cameras from an online retailer. They cost $40 each. They were cheap, utilitarian devices encased in camouflage-patterned plastic, designed for hunters to track game. I mounted one near the back patio. I secured the second unit to a drainage pipe running down the side of the brick exterior, angling the lens to capture the side yard and the heating equipment pad. They operated on standard AA batteries and stored short video clips on removable memory cards whenever the infrared sensors detected movement. I unclipped the plastic housing from the drainage pipe. My fingers were stiff from the lingering cold, but I managed to pry open the weatherproof seal. I pressed the tiny SD card, popping it out of the spring-loaded slot. I slipped the plastic square into my coat pocket, thanked the technician again, and went back inside the house. The digital thermostat in the hallway read 62 degrees and was steadily climbing. The immediate survival crisis was averted. The children were safe inside the master bedroom, shielded by the electric radiator. I walked into my home office and sat down at the desk. I woke my laptop from sleep mode and inserted the memory card into the side port. Toxic family dynamics rely heavily on the abstract nature of their abuse. A guilt trip leaves no physical bruises. A manipulative conversation over a diner table cannot be submitted to a jury. Emotional extortion is a ghost. It haunts your nervous system, but when you try to explain it to an outside observer, it often sounds like petty sibling rivalry. Tyler and Diane operated in this gray area for decades. They stole my peace, my financial stability, and my reputation, always ensuring their actions remained just ambiguous enough to avoid legal consequences. Swinging a heavy metal tool to destroy residential infrastructure in sub-zero weather is not a ghost. It is a tangible prosecutorial fact. A File Explorer window popped open on my laptop screen. The folder contained a dozen small video clips. The majority were daytime recordings of neighborhood squirrels running across the snow. I scrolled down to the bottom of the list, sorting the files by the most recent timestamp. A thumbnail generated for a file created at 12:42 in the morning. I double-clicked the icon. The media player launched, filling the screen with crisp, high-definition infrared footage. The scene was rendered in sharp, grayscale tones. The video began with the empty concrete pad. The snow was untouched. 5 seconds into the playback, a figure stepped into the frame. The person wore a dark winter coat, thick gloves, and a knit hat pulled low. A heavy scarf obscured the lower half of his face. He moved with a distinct, hurried gait, carrying a long-handled tool by his side. He approached the equipment pad. He looked over his shoulder, scanning the dark street to ensure there were no passing vehicles or watchful neighbors. Believing he was entirely alone, he reached up and pulled the heavy scarf down around his neck to catch his breath. The infrared camera lens captured his face in pristine, undeniable clarity. It was Tyler. My brother stood in the center of my side yard. I watched him raise the heavy-duty bolt cutters. The microphone on the trail camera was remarkably sensitive. Through the laptop speakers, I heard the sharp, metallic crunch as the steel jaws sliced through the thick electrical conduit. The power line snapped. Tyler dropped the cutters into the snow. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a smaller, solid object, likely a heavy hammer or a mallet. He stepped closer to the metal housing and began striking the louvered intake grate. The microphone picked up the rhythmic, hollow thuds of metal impacting metal. He hit the grate 4 times, bending the panels inward until they jammed against the interior fan blades. Satisfied with his handiwork, Tyler pulled the scarf back over his face, picked up his bolt cutters, and jogged out of the frame. The video ended, leaving a frozen image of my damaged property. I leaned back in the ergonomic desk chair. The blue light from the monitor reflected in my eyes. If I were the woman I was a month ago, I would have picked up my smartphone immediately. I would have drafted a furious, weeping text message to my brother. I would have demanded to know how he could be so cruel. I would have sent the video clip to my mother, begging her to finally see the monster she had raised. I would have engaged in the chaotic, dramatic cycle they craved, allowing them to formulate excuses, offer hollow apologies, or claim he was just going through a difficult emotional breakdown. I did not touch my phone to send a text. In the medical billing industry, when you discover a smoking gun indicating widespread fraud, you do not warn the physician. You secure the data. I highlighted the video file on the memory card. I executed a copy command, dragging the data onto my local hard drive. I then opened my encrypted cloud storage portal, creating a dedicated folder titled Property Incident. I uploaded the raw video file, the metadata, and a still frame screenshot clearly displaying Tyler's face. I duplicated the files to an external thumb drive. I created 3 separate secure locations for the evidence. No one could delete it. No one could claim it was digitally altered. The family ledger had officially crossed the line from a civil dispute into criminal territory. Tyler had committed property damage and reckless endangerment. He had acted with clear intent to cause physical harm or force an evacuation during a declared weather emergency. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 4 in the morning. The county sheriff administrative offices would open in a few hours. Earlier in the week, when I filed the identity theft affidavit regarding the fraudulent credit card, a specific investigator had been assigned to my file. Detective Davies was a sharp, pragmatic professional who handled financial crimes and domestic fraud. He had provided me with his direct extension, instructing me to call if my relatives escalated their retaliatory tactics. Tyler thought he had executed a flawless, invisible attack. He thought he could drive away into the dark Wisconsin night, leaving me to freeze and panic in the dark. He had no idea that a $40 hunting accessory had just handed me the key to his prison cell. I turned off the laptop monitor. I left the home office and walked back to the master bedroom. The space heater had raised the ambient temperature to a cozy 75 degrees. Leo and Luke were sleeping peacefully, their breathing steady and deep. I sat on the edge of the mattress, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and watched the snow fall outside the window. I did not sleep. I spent the remaining hours of the morning drinking hot coffee and waiting for the sun to rise. I calculated the exact charges. I ran the timeline over in my head, ensuring my narrative was tight, clinical, and devoid of emotional padding. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, the official start of the municipal workday, I picked up my smartphone. I dialed the direct extension for Detective Davies. The phone rang twice before a gruff, professional voice answered the line. I introduced myself and referenced my ongoing case number. I kept my tone level and efficient. I informed the detective that my brother had escalated his harassment. I explained the midnight sabotage of my primary heating system during a sub-zero weather advisory. I stated that infants were inside the residence at the time of the attack. The detective paused the typing on his keyboard, halting. He asked if I possessed any proof that Tyler was the perpetrator. I looked at the thumb drive resting on my kitchen counter. I replied that I possessed high-definition infrared video footage capturing the suspect's face, the weapon, and the exact moment the utility line was severed. I offered to drive to the precinct immediately to deliver the raw files. The detective told me to come in straight away. The trap was fully armed. The authorities possessed the fraudulent credit card application, the trespassing report, and the video evidence of physical destruction. My family was sitting in their short-term rental, waiting for me to break. They had no idea that the machinery of justice was already rolling toward their front door. I parked my vehicle in the visitor lot of the county sheriff headquarters shortly after 9 in the morning. Sarah had arrived early to watch Leo and Luke, allowing me to handle the administrative tasks without distraction. I walked through the sliding glass doors, bypassed the busy front desk, and requested my scheduled meeting. Detective Davies met me in a sterile, windowless interview room. He wore a crisp dress shirt and carried a heavy manila folder bearing my case number. I handed him the encrypted thumb drive containing the high-definition infrared video files. In my profession, transferring audit data to a regulatory agency provides a distinct sense of relief. Handing physical evidence to a sworn investigator amplifies that sensation tenfold. I sat in a hard plastic chair while Davies inserted the drive into his secure terminal. The detective did not offer empty platitudes or emotional sympathy. He operated with the same cold, methodical efficiency I utilized when balancing a fractured ledger. He clicked the media file. The footage played on his monitor. He watched Tyler stalk across my snowy yard, pull down his heavy scarf, and stare directly into the hidden camera lens. Davies listened to the sharp crunch of the bolt cutters, severing the electrical conduit. He watched the metal intake grate buckle under the repeated strikes of the hammer. The investigator paused the video, freezing the frame on my brother's face. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He noted that domestic disputes usually rely on conflicting testimonies, making them notoriously difficult to prosecute. A clear, time-stamped video capturing the suspect destroying residential infrastructure during a severe weather advisory removes all ambiguity. Davies cross-referenced the new video evidence with the existing identity theft affidavit I had filed regarding the Platinum Visa application. The pattern of escalating retaliation was undeniable. The American justice system often moves at a glacial pace, bogged down by bureaucratic delays and endless paperwork. However, when a detective presents a judge with documented financial fraud, coupled with the physical endangerment of premature infants in sub-zero temperatures, the machinery accelerates with terrifying speed. Davies informed me he was taking the files directly to the district attorney to secure an immediate arrest warrant. He advised me to return to my colonial, keep my doors locked, and let the tactical units handle the heavy lifting. I thanked him, walked back to my car, and drove home to my warm, secure perimeter. I was not physically present at the Elm Street apartment complex to witness the raid, but small towns operate like echo chambers, and the official police report later detailed the exact logistical sequence. Shortly after 2 in the afternoon, 2 marked cruisers and 1 unmarked detective vehicle blocked the exits of the short-term rental parking lot. 4 uniformed officers approached the ground floor unit. Tyler was likely sitting on the cheap rental sofa, waiting for my panicked phone call, anticipating my surrender. Instead, heavy, authoritative knocks rattled the door hinges. Diane answered the entrance, expecting a package delivery. The uniforms bypassed her grandmotherly facade entirely, stepping over the threshold, with their hands resting on their duty belts. They located Tyler in the kitchen. He attempted to deploy his trademark boyish charm, offering a crooked grin and asking the officers if there was a simple misunderstanding. The officers were immune to his manipulation. They instructed him to turn around and place his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed in the small apartment. Lauren screamed, dropping a ceramic coffee mug on the linoleum floor. Diane panicked, reverting to her usual tactics. She grabbed an officer by the sleeve, demanding they stop, insisting her son was a good man, and threatening to call a prominent lawyer. The officer issued a stern verbal warning, forcing her to step back or face obstruction charges. The arresting officer read the formal charges aloud in the cramped hallway. Tyler was booked for felony criminal mischief trespassing and reckless endangerment of a minor. The reality of the American penal system crushed his unearned confidence. He was not negotiating a family disagreement over a diner table. He was facing the rigid, unforgiving structure of the state criminal code. The officers escorted him out of the building, marching him past his neighbors, and placed him in the back of a squad car. Diane and Lauren were left standing in the open doorway, watching their primary asset being driven away to the county detention center. By 4 o'clock that same afternoon, the local gossip machinery experienced an immediate, jarring reversal. The county jail maintains an automated, publicly accessible online booking registry. Tyler's profile updated in real time. His mugshot populated the database. He looked pale, exhausted, and stripped of his arrogant bravado, wearing a standard-issue orange uniform instead of his stylish winter coat. The bright fluorescent lighting of the booking room highlighted the terror in his eyes. A vigilant resident discovered the booking record and immediately shared the direct link to the community Facebook page, dropping it right into the comments section of Diane's original tearful essay. The digital tide turned instantly. The same neighbors who had spent an entire week crucifying me as a cold, heartless daughter clicked the link and read the list of aggressive charges. The narrative of the cruel eviction shattered against the hard facts of a felony arrest. Small-town residents are incredibly protective of their own moral standing, and nobody wants to be publicly associated with a man who cuts power lines to freeze newborn babies. Aunt Helen quietly deleted her heavy-handed Bible verses from my inbox. The offers of sympathetic casseroles for Diane ceased immediately. Community members began replying to my mother's post, demanding to know why her son was incarcerated for endangering infants. Several local mothers expressed their outrage, noting that weaponizing the winter weather against a postpartum woman was an unforgivable offense. Instead of answering the mounting questions, Diane deactivated her social media profile, attempting to hide from the public humiliation she had engineered. The smear campaign evaporated into the digital ether. My reputation was cleared by public, documented facts rather than desperate arguments. I sat at my kitchen island holding Leo against my shoulder, watching the snow continue to fall outside the window. The house was quiet, warm, and legally secure. The threat had been neutralized by the authorities. Tyler was currently sitting in a concrete holding cell, waiting for a bail hearing he could not afford, learning that actions carry severe municipal consequences. I felt a profound sense of administrative satisfaction. The ledgers were clean, the fraudulent claims had been rejected, and the perpetrators penalized. But I knew the peace was temporary. A toxic matriarch who has been stripped of her golden child, her public sympathy, and her false narrative does not retreat into quiet reflection. She loses her remaining grip on logic. She becomes desperate. And the very next morning, that unhinged desperation would drive her directly to my front porch for one final, pathetic confrontation. The morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across the unbroken snow in my front yard. The interior of the Colonial was incredibly peaceful. The rhythmic hum of the repaired furnace provided a steady background cadence. I stood at the kitchen island measuring scoops of infant formula into 2 sterilized bottles. The digital clock on the microwave read 9:15. Tyler had spent his first night sleeping on a thin cot inside a concrete county holding cell. The local booking registry indicated his bail hearing was scheduled for later that afternoon. The chime of the front doorbell broke the morning silence. It was not the authoritative, heavy strike of law enforcement. It was a single, hesitant press of the illuminated button. I set the plastic scoop down on the granite counter and walked toward the foyer. I tapped the screen of the security monitor mounted on the drywall. The wide-angle camera displayed the frozen brick porch. My mother stood on the concrete step. The visual contrast between the woman standing outside today and the dictator who had chained this exact door weeks earlier was stark. The arrogant matriarch who had ordered me to find a rental property was gone. The dignified, wounded victim who had spun false narratives for the community Facebook group had evaporated. The figure shivering in the winter wind looked frail, hollowed out, and decades older. She wore a thin jacket zipped up to her chin, lacking a scarf or proper gloves. Her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. I did not feel a sudden surge of vindictive triumph. In the auditing profession, identifying a critical error does not evoke joy. It simply requires you to correct the ledger. I unlocked the brass deadbolt and pulled the heavy fiberglass door open, stepping out onto the porch and pulling the door shut behind me until it latched. I refused to grant her access to my sanctuary. Diane looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen from hours of weeping. The bitter cold bit at our exposed skin, but neither of us moved to retreat. "Hannah, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her hands trembled as she pulled the edges of her jacket tighter. "I need to talk to you. I need you to listen to me." I stood on the frozen welcome mat, crossing my arms over my chest to conserve heat. I did not offer her a greeting. I did not invite her out of the wind. I waited for her to present her case. "He called me from the jail," she continued, the tears spilling over her eyelashes and freezing on her cheeks. "He is terrified. The magistrate set his bail at a sum we cannot afford. They are treating him like a violent criminal. They read the charges to him, Hannah. Felony, property destruction, reckless endangerment. If he gets convicted, it will be on his permanent record. He will never find a decent job. His consulting business will be ruined. His life will be over." She stepped closer, reaching a bare, trembling hand toward my coat sleeve. I shifted my weight backward, denying her the physical contact. "You have to call the detective," Diane pleaded, deploying the final remnants of her familial religion. "You have to tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you overreacted. Tell them it was a misunderstanding and you want to drop the charges. He is your brother. He is your blood. You cannot do this to your own family." The word blood hung in the frigid air between us. For 33 years, that specific word had served as the ultimate currency in our household. It was the universal override code. Whenever Tyler caused a disaster, the invocation of shared biology was supposed to erase his accountability. Blood meant I paid his rent. Blood meant I ignored his insults. Blood meant I was expected to sacrifice my comfort, my credit score, and my physical safety to ensure his trajectory remained smooth. I looked at the woman shivering on my porch. I did not see a mother. I saw a dedicated logistics manager attempting to negotiate a bailout for her failing enterprise. She had not asked about Leo or Luke. She had not inquired if the infants had suffered any ill effects from the sudden temperature drop. She offered no apologies for stealing my 9-digit Social Security number or weaponizing the state child welfare system against me. Her grief was entirely centered on Tyler's discomfort. The final lingering illusion of maternal affection dissolved. Diane did not love me. She loved the utility I provided. She loved my dual monitor setup, my overtime shifts, and my pristine credit rating, because those assets could be harvested and transferred to her son. I was merely an automated teller machine, and she was furious that the machine had swallowed her card. My voice emerged flat, clinical, and devoid of any daughterly warmth. Blood does not repair severed electrical conduits, I stated, staring directly into her red-rimmed eyes. Blood does not reverse identity theft, and blood does not keep premature infants warm when the furnace dies in sub-zero weather. Diane flinched as if I had struck her across the face. But Hannah, he did not mean to hurt the babies. He was just angry. He made a stupid mistake. He brought a pair of heavy bolt cutters to my property. At midnight, I corrected her, maintaining my steady, unyielding tone. He monitored a severe weather advisory and executed a targeted strike on residential infrastructure. He intended to force me out of this house. That is not a mistake. That is a calculated strategy. She shook her head rapidly, refusing to process the objective facts. You can stop this. You are the victim on the report. The district attorney will listen to you. If you refuse to testify, they will drop the case. You have the power to fix this. I do have the power, I agreed quietly, but I will not use it to shield him. The state of Wisconsin is pressing those charges based on the infrared video evidence and the federal fraud affidavit I provided. Even if the prosecutor offered me the option to withdraw the complaint, I would decline. Tyler belongs in that concrete cell. He earned his uniform. Diane let out a raw, desperate sob. Her knees buckled slightly and she leaned against the brick pillar supporting the porch roof. She tried one final, pathetic bartering tactic. If you do this, you will lose us, she warned, her voice dropping into a harsh, ragged whisper. Lauren is packing her bags. She is talking about leaving him because of the scandal. If you send my son to prison, you will never see me again. I will never acknowledge you. Your sons will grow up without a grandmother. You will have no family left. She believed the threat of permanent isolation would break my resolve. She expected the prospect of living without her approval to drive me into a panic. She did not understand that I had already grieved the loss of my family weeks ago, standing on this exact same porch, staring at a new brass deadbolt. I do not want your version of family, I replied, my words hanging in the cold air. Your version requires me to set myself on fire just to keep Tyler warm. I am done paying your invoices. Diane stared at me. The realization finally settled into her features. The compliant, reliable daughter was dead. The well of endless forgiveness had run dry. She had brought her most powerful emotional weapons to the front line, and they had shattered against a wall of clinical indifference. There was nothing left to say. I turned around, gripped the heavy brass handle, and opened the fiberglass door. I stepped inside and pulled it shut, engaging the lock with a firm, decisive, metallic click. Through the frosted sidelight window, I watched her silhouette linger for a long moment before slowly retreating down the icy brick steps. The emotional climax had concluded. The psychological grip my relatives held over my nervous system was permanently severed. I returned to the kitchen, picked up the plastic scoop, and finished preparing the infant formula. However, in the real world, walking away from a toxic system requires more than a dramatic porch conversation. Emotions fade, but legal vulnerabilities persist. Tyler was incarcerated, but he would eventually face a judge for sentencing. Lauren was out there blaming me for her fractured marriage. Diane still knew my physical address. To ensure my children would never endure another midnight attack, I needed to construct an impenetrable, legally binding fortress. I needed to transition from the defensive posture of a victim into the offensive strategy of a prosecutor. It was time to hire a professional litigator and draft an ironclad severance that no amount of shared biology could ever breach. Emotional closure is a comforting concept, but it provides zero tactical protection against a determined adversary. In the medical billing industry, recognizing a fraudulent pattern is merely the first step of the process. The actual resolution requires you to draft new policies, update the software parameters, and establish rigid compliance protocols to ensure the vulnerability can never be exploited again. I had confronted my mother on the front porch and verbally severed our relationship. But words are ephemeral. I needed to construct a tangible administrative fortress. I needed to transition from playing defense to establishing permanent legal boundaries. The following morning, I secured childcare with Sarah and drove into downtown Madison. I had scheduled an extensive consultation with a prominent family law practitioner named attorney Rebecca Thorne. Her office was a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of my recent weeks. The conference room featured heavy mahogany furniture, soundproofed glass walls, and an atmosphere of sterile, uncompromising logic. I sat across the polished table and handed her my thick manila folder. I did not cry. I did not ask for sympathy. I presented the timeline, the infrared video footage, the police reports, and the identity theft affidavit. Attorney Thorne reviewed the documentation with the quiet intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. She explained the distinct separation between the ongoing criminal proceedings and my personal civil protections. The district attorney owned the felony case against Tyler. The state of Wisconsin was acting as the plaintiff, prosecuting the property destruction and the reckless endangerment charges. My role in the criminal arena was limited to serving as the primary witness. However, Thorne emphasized that a criminal prosecution does not automatically shield a victim from collateral harassment. Tyler might be incarcerated pending trial, but Diane was still free, desperate, and highly motivated to protect her son. We spent 4 hours drafting a comprehensive legal strategy to eradicate my family from every facet of my existence. Our first priority was securing permanent civil injunctions. We filed formal petitions for restraining orders against both Tyler and Diane. We submitted the extensive mountain of evidence to a county magistrate. The filing detailed the hostile midnight lockout, the vindictive child welfare hotline report, the stolen Social Security number, and the targeted destruction of my residential heating infrastructure. The judicial review occurred swiftly. The magistrate examined the infrared photographs and the bank fraud records. The ruling was swift and categorical. The court granted full, permanent, no-contact orders. The legal parameters were incredibly strict. Tyler and Diane were strictly prohibited from coming within 1,000 feet of my person, my Colonial on Marigold Drive, my professional workplace, and any pediatric clinic or child care facility Leo and Luke might attend in the future. They were barred from initiating contact via telephone, digital messaging, electronic mail, or third-party intermediaries. The magistrate made it abundantly clear that any violation of these terms would bypass a simple warning and result in immediate, mandatory arrest. The boundary was no longer a personal request from a tired daughter. It was an armed mandate enforced by the state. With my physical perimeter secured by the court system, Attorney Thorne and I initiated a meticulous audit of my personal estate. When you exist within a highly enmeshed, toxic family structure, invisible tentacles of assumed access wrap around your entire life. I needed to sever every single assumption. We started with the real estate. To ensure Tyler or Diane could never attempt to challenge my ownership or place a fraudulent lien against my property, I established a revocable living trust. I transferred the warranty deed of the Colonial directly into the protective legal entity. The house was locked inside an impenetrable administrative vault. Next, we addressed my healthcare directives. In many jurisdictions, if a single individual experiences a severe medical emergency and is rendered incapacitated, the hospital defaults to the closest biological relative for decision-making authority. The thought of Diane holding the power to dictate my medical care or control access to my hospital room was unacceptable. We drafted ironclad medical power of attorney documents. I explicitly revoked any and all rights my biological relatives might claim. I appointed my trusted neighbor Sarah as my sole healthcare proxy. I provided copies of these notarized directives to my primary care physician and the local hospital network, ensuring the records were updated in their digital systems. Finally, I contacted the federal credit bureaus and extended the security freezes on my Social Security number for the maximum duration permitted by law. I changed my banking institutions, transferred my business accounts, and established new passwords for every digital portal I owned. I scrubbed my entire digital footprint, removing any vulnerability that could be leveraged by an entitled relative. While I was methodically constructing my administrative armor, the reality of the criminal justice system was rapidly destroying the opposition camp. Toxic relationships are typically held together by the mutual benefit of shared entitlement. Lauren had happily supported Tyler when his entitlement promised her a free 3-bedroom house and a stolen credit line. However, the prospect of facing reality altered her loyalty. Tyler was sitting in a county jail cell, staring down a potential multi-year prison sentence. The financial burden of retaining a competent defense lawyer was catastrophic. The town gossip had turned against them, replacing community sympathy with intense public scrutiny. Lauren quickly realized the lucrative venture had collapsed. She did not possess the fortitude required to stand by a partner facing felony convictions and a ruined public reputation. She packed her belongings, gathered her own resources, and abandoned the short-term rental on Elm Street. A few days after the permanent restraining orders were formally served by the county deputies, my smartphone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The incoming text message originated from an unknown, unregistered phone number. Lauren had purchased a prepaid cellular device to bypass the digital block I had previously established on her primary contact information. The message contained a lengthy, bitter paragraph of projected blame. She did not take accountability for dismantling my newborn cribs or participating in the hostile residential takeover. Instead, she informed me that she had left Tyler for good. She accused me of destroying her marriage. She claimed that my refusal to compromise, my cold demeanor, and my unforgiving nature had ruined their lives. She ended the message by stating she hoped I was happy, sitting all alone in my big, empty house. I read the text message while holding a warm mug of coffee. I did not feel a single tremor of guilt. I did not feel the familiar, heavy urge to defend my actions or explain my perspective. I looked at the angry, venomous words glowing on the screen, and I recognized them for what they truly were. They were the desperate flailings of an auditor who had been caught falsifying the records. I did not type a reply. I did not offer her the closure or the dramatic friction she was seeking. I simply pressed the delete icon, erasing the text from my device. I blocked the new prepaid number, adding it to the extensive list of rejected contacts. The administrative work of ending a toxic family was officially finished. Every loophole was closed, every access point was sealed. The familial ledger, which had operated at a severe deficit for 33 years, was permanently zeroed out. The chaotic noise of manipulation, extortion, and constant crisis management was replaced by the steady, predictable rhythm of my own independent life. The battle was over. The paperwork was filed. But the true test of a successfully enforced boundary is not the dramatic conflict itself. The true test is learning how to navigate the profound, unfamiliar silence that follows, and discovering who you actually are when you stop paying the emotional rent. 6 months have passed since that freezing February night. The brutal Wisconsin winter finally broke in late May. The heavy snowdrifts that once buried the concrete equipment pad melted away. They left bright green grass and soft soil in their wake. The pine trees lining the edge of my backyard are full and vibrant. Inside the Colonial on Marigold Drive, the atmosphere is entirely transformed. The artificial vanilla scent is a distant memory. It is replaced by the smell of warm laundry and fresh air coming through the open windows. Leo and Luke are now 6 months old. They are robust, energetic infants. They are rolling across the thick carpet in the living room, laughing and reaching for brightly colored plastic blocks. They are thriving, surrounded by a physical and emotional environment that is perfectly calibrated for their safety. The sage green nursery belongs entirely to them. The white wooden cribs hold them securely every night. This real estate is legally and undeniably mine. But arriving at this serene destination was not a seamless journey. I promised to provide an honest accounting of this experience. The truth is that surviving a toxic family system requires you to navigate a brutal period of psychological withdrawal. In the medical auditing profession, when a large, complex client account is suddenly terminated, your daily routine feels empty. For 33 years, my central nervous system was wired to anticipate disaster. I was conditioned to wake up and check my smartphone, bracing for Tyler to demand money or for Diane to issue a guilt-inducing complaint. When you spend your entire existence acting as the designated crisis manager, your brain confuses chaos with connection. During the first few weeks of the spring, I experienced phantom anxieties. I would sit in my home office staring at the dual monitors, and my heart rate would suddenly spike. I would wait for the inevitable text message demanding a financial bailout. I would listen to the wind rattling the window panes and feel a spike of adrenaline, expecting to see a shadow standing on my front porch. Detoxing from the role of the reliable daughter was physically painful. The absence of conflict created a strange, misplaced guilt. I questioned if I had been too rigid. I wondered if enforcing the legal boundary was overly harsh. Toxic relatives install those doubtful voices inside your head on purpose. They train you to feel selfish the moment you stop handing them your resources. They condition you to believe that establishing a perimeter is a hostile act. I treated that guilt the same way I treat a duplicated billing charge. I recognized it as an error and refused to validate the feeling. Whenever the doubt crept into my mind, I walked into my home office and looked at the fireproof safe. I reminded myself of the severed electrical conduit, the stolen Social Security number, and the dismantled infant beds. Slowly, week by week, the frantic internal noise began to fade. The silence that used to feel terrifying gradually shifted into a profound, unshakable peace. I learned to sleep through the night without keeping one ear tuned to the security system. I learned to drink my morning coffee without preparing a mental defense strategy. The cortisol levels in my bloodstream finally stabilized. My body realized the war was over. The void left by my biological relatives was quickly filled by people who demonstrated what authentic connection actually looks like. Sarah, the retired pediatric nurse who lived down the street, became a permanent fixture in our lives. She did not just help me during the acute crisis. She continued to show up. She would knock on the door on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a tray of baked chicken and fresh vegetables. She would sit on the living room floor, playing with Leo and Luke, so I could take a hot shower. When I attempted to hand her money to compensate her for her time and the groceries, she gently pushed my hand away. She looked at me with genuine warmth and told me that neighbors help neighbors without keeping a tab. That simple interaction rewired my understanding of human relationships. I began to cultivate a chosen family of friends and colleagues who never asked me for a dime. We shared dinners, celebrated milestones, and supported each other without maintaining a hidden ledger of debts. I realized that a healthy relationship does not require you to purchase your seat at the table. You do not have to prove your worth by absorbing someone else's deficit. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who loved Hannah the person, not Hannah the automated teller machine. They celebrated my successes instead of calculating how to harvest my income. The American justice system concluded its work in late April. Tyler accepted a plea agreement to avoid a prolonged public trial. He received a formal felony conviction for criminal mischief and reckless endangerment. The judge handed down a substantial period of supervised probation and mandated full financial restitution for the damaged heating unit. The permanent restraining orders remain in full effect. Diane and Tyler live somewhere on the other side of the county, navigating the consequences of their own choices. They are no longer my problem to solve. They are closed accounts, archived and sealed. I do not track their movements, and I do not lose sleep wondering if they have changed. Let me pause here and speak directly to you, the person listening to this narrative. I know exactly how heavy it feels to carry the weight of an entitled family. I know how they twist the concept of loyalty, using it as a weapon to extract your time, your energy, and your hard-earned stability. They tell you that family means unconditional support, but what they really mean is unconditional compliance. They expect you to act as a shock absorber for their poor decisions, demanding that you sacrifice your future to fund their endless failures. I spent a decade tipping my own relatives just for the privilege of being acknowledged. I allowed them to convince me that my boundaries were acts of betrayal. If you take one lesson away from my experience on that freezing February night, please let it be this exact truth. Love that hands you a bill is just rent. Stop paying for a family that never intended to love you back. You do not owe anyone your financial security. You do not have to apologize for protecting your children, your assets, or your peace of mind. The people who genuinely care about your well-being will never ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. They will never demand that you dismantle your own life to build theirs. If you have survived your own family ledgers, I want to hear your voice. If you have finally stopped paying the emotional toll and changed the locks on your own life, drop a comment below and share your story. You are not alone in this process. Subscribe to QT Told Stories so we can continue to build a community of people who learned how to say no. Stay with us as we share more accounts of quiet women who stopped explaining themselves and let the truth do the talking. And whenever you feel the guilt creeping in, whenever they try to convince you that you are selfish for claiming your own space, look at the life you built with your own 2 hands. Stand on your own front porch. Remember the most important detail of all. Your name on the deed is the only permission you need.